Some heroes get parades. Others get forgotten behind a locked gate. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and old concrete, the kind of scent that lingered long after the day was done. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting pale reflections across the polished floor of the County K-9 retirement facility just outside Cedar Ridge, Colorado. Beyond a row of steel kennels, morning sunlight struggled through narrow windows, painting thin bands of gold across the walls. It was barely 7 o'clock, and the building was quiet except for the occasional click of claws against concrete and the distant rustle of bedding. At the very end of the corridor sat Rex. The German Shepherd no longer looked like the powerful police dog he had once been. His muzzle had turned silver with age. The black saddle across his back had faded in places, and his movements carried the stiffness of countless years spent working beside officers who trusted him with their lives. Yet his amber eyes remained clear, alert, watching, waiting. A laminated card hung outside his kennel door. K9 Rex, age 11, retired. Beside it sat a cardboard box containing a worn leather collar, a training ribbon, and a photograph curled at the corners from time. The picture showed a younger Rex standing proudly beside a smiling officer in front of a patrol vehicle. Back then, neither of them imagined this ending. Rex lifted his head when footsteps echoed through the hallway. Not hurried footsteps, not nervous ones. Slow, familiar somehow, hopeful. But the visitor passed by without stopping. The dog lowered his head again. Across the corridor, another retired police dog rested quietly on a blanket. Farther down, a black Labrador slept with his nose tucked beneath his tail. Once, these dogs had searched for missing children, tracked suspects through forests, located evidence hidden beneath snow and brush. They had worked in rainstorms, summer heat, and freezing mountain winds. They had served. Now they waited. Some would be adopted. Some would not. Nobody said the difficult part out loud. The facility director stood near the front office window reviewing paperwork as sunlight brightened the parking lot outside. A transport van was scheduled to arrive later that morning. Several dogs were being moved to another location. Efficiency. Logistics. Numbers on a page. Through the glass, a cold breeze rattled the American flag mounted near the entrance. The director sighed and turned another page. Down the hallway, Rex slowly rose to his feet. His ears twitched. Something had changed. Somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the gates and fences, an engine had just gone silent. A truck door closed. Then came footsteps. Different this time. Stronger. Deliberate. Drawing closer with every second. Rex stepped forward until he reached the front of his kennel. Light spilled across his face. The other dogs began lifting their heads one by one. The hallway remained silent. Yet something invisible seemed to move through the room. The feeling before a storm breaks. The feeling before a prayer is answered. Outside, a tall man crossed the parking lot carrying nothing except a weathered jacket and a burden no one could see. His name was Nathan Brooks. He thought he was arriving to meet one retired police dog. He had no idea that before the day ended, a promise would leave his lips that would change dozens of lives, including his own. Nathan Brooks paused outside the entrance for a moment before stepping inside. The cool mountain air still clung to his jacket, carrying the scent of pine trees and damp earth from the hills surrounding Cedar Ridge. At 37 years old, Nathan had learned not to rush important moments. Life had taught him that some doors deserved a second of silence before they opened. The facility director greeted him with a polite handshake and a tired smile. "Officer Brooks, glad you made the drive." Nathan nodded. Would not miss it. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man accustomed to speaking only when necessary. He followed the director through the lobby and into the long kennel corridor. The sound hit him first. Not barking, not chaos, just quiet breathing. The soft movement of paws against blankets. The occasional jingle of an old collar. It felt less like a shelter and more like a retirement home for forgotten heroes. Nathan slowed his pace. One kennel after another came into view. German Shepherds, Labradors, Belgian Malinois, dogs with gray around their muzzles and wisdom behind their eyes. Dogs who seemed to understand more than people realized. Several stood when they saw him. Others remained lying down but watched carefully. The director spoke as they walked. Most of them served 8 to 10 years. Some longer. Outstanding records. Search work. Tracking. Community service. The usual. Nathan listened quietly. He stopped beside a kennel where an aging Labrador rested with his chin on his paws. A small plaque listed years of service beneath the dog's name. 10 years. Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. 10 years of loyalty reduced to a metal card and a file folder. Do they get many visitors? He asked. The director hesitated. Some do. Most do not. The answer lingered heavily in the air. They continued down the corridor until they reached the final kennel. Rex was already standing. The German Shepherd's amber eyes never left Nathan. For several seconds, neither moved. The hallway seemed to disappear. Nathan crouched slowly near the gate. Rex stepped forward. No barking. No nervousness. Just a long look between two souls carrying more miles than either wanted to admit. Nathan noticed the silver fur around the dog's muzzle, the slight stiffness in his posture, the faded scars of a long career spent serving others. Yet there was dignity in him, a quiet strength that age had not taken away. "Hello, partner," Nathan said softly. Rex's ears lifted. The shepherd pressed his nose gently against the kennel door. Nathan smiled for the first time that morning. The director folded his arms. He was one of our best. Worked nearly 11 years. Retired 6 months ago. Nathan nodded while scratching beneath the gate where Rex could reach his hand. The dog closed his eyes briefly, as though savoring a familiar kindness. Then Nathan noticed something else. Kennels farther down the corridor. More dogs than he expected. More gray muzzles. More retirement cards. More waiting eyes. His gaze moved from one face to another. The shepherd beside him seemed to notice. Rex turned and looked down the hallway too. The director cleared his throat. "Truth is, we are running out of space." Nathan looked back at him. "What happens to them?" The director stared toward the office window. Outside, the transport van had just arrived. Its engine settled into silence. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the director answered quietly. "Some get homes. Some spend a long time waiting." Nathan glanced at Rex again. The shepherd stepped closer until his shoulder touched the kennel gate. And for reasons he could not explain, the hallway suddenly felt much smaller than it had a few minutes earlier. The transport van sat outside beneath a pale Colorado sky, its white paint reflecting the morning sun. Through the front windows of the facility, Nathan could see the driver reviewing paperwork while a cold breeze nudged loose leaves across the parking lot. Inside, the kennel corridor felt quieter than before. The question he had asked still lingered in the air. What happens to them? The director rubbed the back of his neck and exhaled slowly. "We do our best," he said. "But there are more retired dogs every year. Funding only stretches so far. Some find families quickly. Others wait months. Sometimes longer." Nathan looked down the row of kennels. A German shepherd with cloudy eyes stood carefully and approached the gate. A retired Labrador wagged his tail once before settling back onto his blanket. Another shepherd rested beside a worn tennis ball that looked older than some cars on the road. None of them barked. None of them demanded attention. They simply watched. Waiting had become part of their routine. Nathan felt a familiar ache in his chest. Years earlier, after leaving the Marines, he had spent months trying to figure out where he belonged. The uniform was gone. The mission was gone. Friends had moved away. Life kept moving, but some mornings it felt like the world had forgotten his name. Looking at these dogs now, he recognized something in their eyes. Not sadness, not fear, something quieter. The feeling of having served faithfully and no longer knowing what came next. Rex remained beside the gate. His amber eyes followed Nathan wherever he moved. The old shepherd carried himself with dignity, but there was a loneliness around him that could not be hidden. Nathan reached through the bars again and scratched behind the dog's ear. Rex leaned into the touch. Just slightly. Just enough. The director noticed. He does not usually warm up that fast. Nathan smiled faintly. Maybe he is being polite. The director laughed softly. Or maybe he knows something. They continued walking. Near the office, several framed photographs covered one wall. Retired K-9 teams. Graduation ceremonies. Community events. Smiling officers standing beside dogs that had spent years protecting neighborhoods, schools, and families. Nathan stopped at one picture showing a younger Rex receiving an award. The shepherd stood tall beside his handler, ears forward, eyes bright with purpose. What happened to his partner? Nathan asked. The director's expression softened. Retired out of state a few years ago. Health issues. Could not take Rex afterward. Nathan nodded quietly. Nobody was at fault. Life simply changed sometimes. Yet the knowledge settled heavily inside him. He glanced back toward the kennels. More waiting faces. More stories. More years of loyalty packed into narrow spaces. Outside, the transport van driver stepped from the vehicle and began walking toward the entrance carrying a clipboard. Nathan watched through the glass. Then he looked at the dogs again. One by one. Every gray muzzle. Every hopeful pair of eyes. Something shifted inside him. It was not a plan. It was not logic. It was something deeper than that. The kind of feeling that arrives when the heart reaches a conclusion before the mind catches up. Rex stepped closer and rested against the gate. Nathan stared at him for several seconds. Then he spoke so quietly that only the director heard the words. They spent their lives showing up for people. He swallowed hard. Seems wrong that they have to finish the journey alone. The director did not answer immediately. Outside, the front door opened. The driver entered carrying his clipboard. Inside the corridor, the morning suddenly felt different, as though an unseen chapter was beginning to turn. Nathan stood motionless as the transport driver entered the corridor. The man carried a clipboard tucked beneath one arm and wore the weary expression of someone simply doing his job. There was nothing cruel about him. Nothing harsh. Yet the sight of that clipboard felt heavier than it should have. The director accepted the paperwork and glanced down the list. The rustle of pages seemed unusually loud in the quiet building. One by one, names filled the sheet. Dogs scheduled for transfer. Dogs who had already spent months waiting. Dogs whose futures remained uncertain. Nathan looked back toward the kennels. Several of the retired K9s had risen to their feet. Some watched curiously. Others simply observed with the calm patience that comes from years of training. Rex never looked away. The old German shepherd stood near the gate, ears forward, amber eyes fixed on Nathan as if sensing the battle taking place inside the man. Outside the narrow windows, clouds drifted slowly across the Colorado sky. Sunlight faded and returned in soft waves across the corridor floor. For a moment, Nathan remembered another morning years earlier. A younger version of himself, standing in uniform beside fellow Marines. Men who trusted one another completely. Men who understood a simple promise. Nobody gets left behind. The words returned unexpectedly, carrying memories he had not visited in years. He swallowed hard. Then he looked around once more. At the silver muzzles. At the aging paws. At the quiet dignity filling every kennel. The director closed the folder. The driver can take 6 today, he said gently. The others will remain here for now. Nathan lowered his eyes briefly. 6. Such a small number on paper. Yet each represented an entire life. Years of service. Years of loyalty. He walked slowly down the corridor, one kennel after another, reading names, looking into eyes, meeting stories that no file folder could fully tell. A retired shepherd named Duke pressed his nose against the bars. A black Labrador named Cooper wagged his tail despite the stiffness in his hips. A Belgian Malinois named Sadie sat perfectly still, her posture remaining professional even in retirement. Nathan felt his chest tighten with every step. The director followed quietly behind him. Finally, Nathan stopped near the center of the hallway. The words arrived before he could second-guess them, before logic could interfere, before fear could explain why the idea made no sense. He turned toward the director. How many are here? The director blinked. 14. Nathan nodded once. Then he looked back at the dogs. Every single one of them. I will take them. Silence filled the corridor. Even the driver stopped writing. The director stared at him for several seconds. Nathan, he almost laughed in disbelief. You cannot possibly mean all 14. Nathan's eyes remained on the kennels. I do. The director looked genuinely stunned. Do you know what that would require? Food, veterinary care, space, time. Nathan nodded. I know. The driver shifted awkwardly. Sir, that is a lot of retired police dogs. For the first time, a faint smile touched Nathan's face. I know that too. The director rubbed his forehead. Where would you even put them? Nathan thought of the old family property outside town. 30 acres surrounded by pines and open fields. A weathered farmhouse. An aging red barn. More dreams than money. More work than common sense. Yet suddenly he could see it. Dogs running through grass. Sunlight instead of steel bars. Freedom instead of waiting. Rex stepped forward and placed one paw against the kennel door. Nathan looked directly at him. The old shepherd's eyes seemed brighter somehow, not because he understood every word, but because hope has a way of being recognized, even without language. And in that quiet corridor, surrounded by forgotten heroes, hope had just entered the room. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Nathan made his decision. The silence felt almost sacred, as though the corridor itself was struggling to absorb what had just been said. 14 retired police dogs. 14 lives. 14 stories. The director finally released a slow breath and shook his head. I have worked here for 12 years, he said quietly. I have never heard anyone say that. Nathan looked down the hallway once more. The dogs remained calm, but something subtle had changed. Tails that had been still now moved gently against blankets. Ears lifted. Eyes followed him with renewed attention. Hope often arrives quietly. Sometimes it enters a room on nothing more than a promise. The director motioned toward his office. Come with me. Nathan gave Rex one final scratch beneath the chin before following him. The old shepherd watched every step. Inside the office, sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating shelves lined with plaques, photographs, and retirement awards. The director closed the door behind them and sat down heavily. Nathan, I believe your heart is in the right place. He folded his hands together. But this is not adopting one dog. This is an entire operation. Nathan nodded. I understand. Do you? The director opened a file drawer and removed several folders. Food costs, veterinary visits, medication, specialized care for older animals, transportation, property maintenance. He placed the stack on the desk. Some of these dogs require daily supplements. Some have arthritis. A few need regular monitoring. Nathan listened carefully. None of it surprised him. He had expected obstacles. Life rarely handed meaningful things to people without asking something in return. The director leaned back in his chair. Tell me honestly, what do you have? Nathan smiled faintly. Not much. The answer earned a tired laugh. That is what worries me. Nathan stared through the office window toward the distant mountains. I have 30 acres outside town. An old farmhouse. A barn that probably needs more repairs than I can afford. He paused. And I have time. The director remained silent. No wife. No children. No one depending on me. Nathan's voice softened. Just me. The room grew quiet again. Somewhere outside, a kennel door clicked softly. A dog barked once in the distance. Nathan looked down at his hands. Hands marked by years of work, service, and sacrifice. When I left the Marines, I spent a long time trying to figure out what my next mission was supposed to be. He smiled sadly. Maybe this sounds crazy. It does, the director admitted. Nathan nodded. Maybe it is. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the director stood and walked toward a framed photograph hanging beside the bookshelf. The picture showed a retired K-9 resting beside an elderly man on a front porch. Both looked content. Both looked home. You know what I have learned? The director asked. Nathan shook his head. These dogs do not care about perfect conditions. They do not care about fancy facilities. His eyes remained on the photograph. They just want someone to choose them. The words settled deeply inside Nathan. Someone to choose them. Outside the office, Rex remained near the front of his kennel. The old shepherd had not moved far. Sunlight now stretched across the floor in front of him, warming his paws. He watched the office door patiently, as though he trusted that something important was unfolding beyond it. An hour later, Nathan finally stepped back into the corridor. The director followed, carrying paperwork. There were still countless challenges ahead. Inspections, approvals, preparations. No guarantees, no certainty. Yet the first step had been taken. As Nathan walked past the kennels, several dogs rose to greet him. Cooper's tail wagged harder than before. Duke stood straighter. Even Sadie seemed less guarded. Then Nathan noticed something unusual. Rex was no longer standing by his own kennel. Instead, the shepherd had moved several doors down the corridor. He stood beside an isolated kennel tucked partially around a corner. A kennel Nathan had somehow overlooked all morning. The old shepherd glanced toward Nathan, then toward the kennel, then back again. Once, twice, as though trying to show him something. Nathan slowed his pace. A strange feeling stirred in his chest. Rex waited silently beside the hidden enclosure. And for the first time that day, it seemed the old police dog was not asking for help for himself. Rex waited beside the hidden kennel with the patience of a veteran officer who knew exactly what he was doing. The old German shepherd did not bark. He did not paw at the gate. He simply stood there, looking from Nathan to the enclosure and back again. Nathan slowed his steps. Something about the shepherd's behavior felt intentional. Over the years, he had learned to trust instincts, especially the instincts of working dogs. They often noticed things people missed. The corridor had grown quieter as afternoons settled over the facility. Warm sunlight filtered through the high windows, stretching long golden rectangles across the concrete floor. Dust drifted lazily through the light. Somewhere outside, wind moved gently through the pine trees surrounding the property. Nathan approached the kennel. Unlike the others, this one sat partially hidden behind a corner wall near a storage room. The nameplate attached to the gate was older than the rest. The edges had faded. The lettering was difficult to read. He leaned closer. Grace, female German Shepherd, retired K9, age 10. Nathan frowned. He had walked past nearly every enclosure that morning. Somehow he had missed this one entirely. Slowly he looked inside. At first he saw only shadows. Then two dark eyes reflected the sunlight. Grace remained lying quietly on a blanket near the back wall. Her sable coat was beautiful despite the gray beginning to appear around her muzzle. She was smaller than Rex, but carried the same dignity, the same quiet intelligence. Yet unlike the other dogs, she did not approach the gate. She simply watched, calm, reserved, almost as if she had grown accustomed to being overlooked. Nathan crouched near the entrance. Hello there. Grace lifted her head slightly. Her ears twitched, but she remained where she was. The director noticed where Nathan had stopped and walked over. His expression softened immediately. Grace. Nathan glanced at him. Why is she back here? The director hesitated before answering. Because she prefers it. Nathan looked unconvinced. The director sighed. She retired almost a year ago. One of the best detection dogs we ever worked with. Extremely loyal. Extremely intelligent. He paused. When her handler passed away unexpectedly from an illness, she never fully adjusted. Nathan's eyes returned to the shepherd. Grace remained motionless except for the slow rise and fall of her breathing. Nobody adopted her? The director shook his head. Several families tried. What happened? She would not leave the door. Nathan felt something heavy settle in his chest. The director continued quietly. Every day she waited. Every sound in the hallway. Every vehicle outside. She kept expecting someone to come back. Silence filled the corridor. Nathan understood that kind of waiting. More people did than they admitted. Some waited for phone calls. Some waited for opportunities. Some waited for loved ones they missed every day. Grace had simply been doing it with the faithfulness only a dog could possess. Beside him, Rex stepped closer to the kennel. His tail moved slowly. Grace looked at him for the first time. For a brief moment, something changed in her eyes. Not excitement. Recognition. The familiar comfort of another retired partner who understood her journey. Nathan smiled softly. So that is why you brought me here. Rex sat down beside the gate as if satisfied that his point had finally been understood. The director chuckled quietly. You know, I have always wondered about those two. Nathan looked at him. What do you mean? Different units. Different careers. Yet every morning, Rex comes down here. Grace lowered her head onto her paws again, but this time she seemed more relaxed. Less alone. Nathan stared at both shepherds. Two old officers. Two lives built on service. Two hearts carrying invisible memories. Outside, clouds drifted across the mountains while sunlight continued pouring through the windows. And standing there between the kennels, Nathan realized his promise had quietly become something larger than he first imagined. He was not just giving these dogs a place to stay. He was giving them back something they had nearly lost. Belonging. 3 weeks later, the old farmhouse looked nothing like the dream Nathan had first imagined. It looked harder, realer, more honest. The white paint along the porch was peeling in places. Several fence posts leaned slightly after years of Colorado winters. The barn roof still carried patches that needed repair, and every morning seemed to reveal another project waiting to be tackled. Yet as the first light of dawn spilled across the 30-acre property, something remarkable was beginning to take shape. Life had returned. The air smelled of fresh hay, pine trees, damp earth, and coffee brewing inside the farmhouse kitchen. Birds filled the morning sky with song. Wind moved softly through the tall grass that stretched toward the distant foothills. And scattered across the property were 14 retired police dogs slowly learning what retirement was supposed to feel like. The transition had not been easy. During the first week, several dogs refused to leave their kennels. Others paced endlessly, searching for routines that no longer existed. Cooper waited by the front gate every afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock, expecting a patrol vehicle that never arrived. Sadie insisted on inspecting every corner of the property twice each day. Duke slept lightly, always ready for instructions that no one was giving anymore. Grace spent long hours sitting near the barn entrance, watching the driveway in silence. Nathan never forced any of them to change. He understood. Some wounds were not physical. Some hearts needed time. Every morning before sunrise, he walked the property carrying a steaming mug of coffee while 14 pairs of eyes gradually learned to follow him instead of old memories. The routine became their anchor. Breakfast at 6. Walks through the meadow. Quiet afternoons beneath the cottonwood trees. Evenings spent on the wide front porch as sunlight painted the mountains gold. Little by little, the dogs began to relax. Little by little, they started becoming dogs again. Yet the most surprising change came from the town itself. At first, people thought Nathan had lost his mind. The local feed store owner shook his head when Nathan purchased enough supplies for 14 retired K9s. A neighbor driving past the property counted dogs running near the fence and nearly drove into a ditch from disbelief. Word spread quickly through Cedar Ridge. The former Marine with a farm full of retired police dogs. Some laughed. Some questioned how long it would last. Most assumed he would eventually realize the challenge was too big. Then something unexpected happened. Children began asking their parents if they could visit. Veterans stopped by carrying bags of dog food. A retired carpenter volunteered to repair part of the barn roof. The local veterinarian offered discounted services. One Saturday morning, Nathan walked outside to discover 3 pickup trucks parked beside the fence line. Men and women he barely knew stepped out carrying lumber, fencing materials, and work gloves. "Figured you could use a hand," one of them said with a grin. By sunset, half the repairs Nathan had worried about for months were already finished. The dogs noticed the change too. Tails wagged more often. Barking became playful instead of anxious. Grace even began leaving her usual spot near the barn to explore the fields. But perhaps the most extraordinary transformation belonged to Rex. The old German shepherd had quietly become the heart of the property. He checked on every dog each morning. He accompanied Nathan during chores. He seemed to know exactly which newcomers needed comfort and which ones needed space. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Nathan found Rex lying beside Grace near the edge of the pasture. Neither dog moved. They simply watched the horizon together. 2 old partners resting beneath a peaceful sky. Nathan smiled and leaned against the fence. For the first time in years, the property no longer felt empty. The farmhouse no longer felt forgotten. And somewhere deep inside, he realized the dogs were not the only ones being rescued. Autumn arrived gently in Cedar Ridge. The cottonwood leaves turned gold. Cool winds drifted down from the mountains. Mornings carried the scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys, and the fields surrounding Nathan's property glowed beneath soft amber sunlight. Nearly 3 months had passed since the dogs first arrived. What had once looked like an impossible promise had slowly become a living community. Visitors came almost every week now. Families brought blankets. Local businesses donated supplies. Veterans often stopped by simply to sit on the porch and share stories. Yet the most beautiful changes happened in the quiet moments when nobody was watching. One Saturday afternoon, Nathan stood near the barn repairing a section of fencing when he noticed a small car pull into the gravel driveway. A woman stepped out first, followed by a little girl no older than 8. The child remained close to her mother's side. She held a stuffed rabbit against her chest and stared nervously toward the dogs moving across the pasture. Nathan wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over with a welcoming smile. "Afternoon." The woman smiled back. "We heard about this place." Her eyes moved toward her daughter. "Emily wanted to come." Nathan looked down at the little girl. Emily offered a shy wave, but quickly lowered her gaze. "You like dogs?" Nathan asked gently. The child hesitated before answering. "I want to." Her mother sighed softly. "She has been afraid of them since she was very little." Nathan nodded with understanding. Fear was not something you argued with. It was something you walked beside until it felt safe enough to let go. He invited them onto the porch where several of the older dogs rested in the afternoon sunshine. Cooper slept peacefully near the steps. Sadie stretched beneath a rocking chair. Duke lay beside a water bowl, looking completely content. Emily watched them carefully. None of the dogs approached. None demanded attention. They simply existed peacefully. After a few minutes, another figure emerged from around the side of the house. Rex, the old German shepherd, moved slowly now. Age had softened his stride, but not his presence. His silver muzzle gleamed in the sunlight as he crossed the yard. When he reached the porch, he paused several feet away from Emily and sat down. Not too close, not too far. The little girl stared at him. Rex stared back. Calm, patient, kind. Wind rustled through the trees overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime sang softly. Minutes passed. Neither moved. Then something unexpected happened. Emily lowered her stuffed rabbit. Just a little. Her shoulders relaxed. Rex remained exactly where he was, as though he understood this moment belonged entirely to her. Nathan watched quietly from the porch railing. He had seen working dogs locate missing people. He had seen them perform extraordinary tasks. Yet some of their greatest gifts could never be measured. Eventually, Emily took a small step forward. Then another. Her mother covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. The child stopped directly in front of Rex. The old shepherd lifted his head slightly. Emily reached out one trembling hand. Rex gently leaned forward and rested his muzzle against her fingers. That was all. No dramatic movement. No miracle anyone could photograph. Just trust meeting trust. Fear giving way to courage. The little girl smiled. Then she wrapped both arms around the old shepherd's neck. Rex closed his eyes. Around them, the property remained peaceful beneath the golden afternoon sky. The mountains stood silent in the distance. Leaves drifted across the pasture, and Nathan felt something warm settle into his heart. The dogs had arrived needing a home. Somehow they had become one. Winter arrived quietly that year. Snow settled across the pastures in soft white blankets, covering the fences, the barn roof, and the winding driveway that led to the farmhouse. The world seemed slower beneath the cold sky. Mornings began with frost sparkling on the grass and clouds of warm breath rising from dogs eager to greet another day. Months had passed since Nathan first walked into the retirement facility. The promise that once sounded impossible had become a living reality. The old property now had a name painted on a wooden sign near the entrance. The Last Watch Sanctuary. Visitors often stopped to take photographs beside it. Some came to volunteer. Others came simply to sit quietly among the dogs and remember loved ones who had served. One snowy afternoon, Nathan stood on the porch holding a mug of coffee while watching the shepherds move across the field. Rex walked at the front as he always did, slower now, but still carrying himself with calm authority. Grace followed nearby. Cooper trotted through the snow with the enthusiasm of a puppy despite his age. Laughter drifted across the property from a group of visitors helping repair a fence line. The sound blended with the wind moving through the pines. It felt like home. Nathan glanced toward a framed photograph hanging beside the front door. It showed all 14 retired police dogs gathered together during the sanctuary's first autumn. Some sat perfectly. Others looked away at the last second. It was imperfect. It was beautiful. Looking at it now, Nathan realized how much had changed. The dogs had regained joy. The community had found purpose. And somewhere along the way, a man who thought he was rescuing abandoned heroes had discovered that they were rescuing him too. A familiar weight pressed gently against his leg. Nathan looked down. Rex had climbed the porch steps without making a sound. The old German shepherd settled beside him and gazed across the snowy fields. Together they watched the late afternoon sunlight break through the clouds and turn the snow into a sea of gold. Neither moved. Neither needed to. Some friendships no longer require words. The years ahead remained uncertain. Time touches every living thing. Yet there was peace in that moment. Real peace. The kind that cannot be purchased or forced. The kind that grows quietly from loyalty, kindness, and second chances. As evening approached, porch lights flickered on across the property. The dogs slowly gathered near the farmhouse for dinner. Warm light spilled through the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney into the fading sky. Nathan set down his coffee and smiled as Rex rose to follow the others. For a brief moment, the old shepherd paused and looked back. His amber eyes reflected the porch light. Then he continued toward the house. Nathan watched him go, his heart full in a way he could not explain. Some people spend their entire lives searching for a purpose worthy of their time on earth. Sometimes that purpose arrives wearing a worn collar, carrying a gray muzzle, and asking for nothing more than a place to belong. And beneath the first stars of a Colorado winter, surrounded by 14 retired heroes who finally had a home, Nathan understood something simple and true. The most beautiful things rarely happen because someone planned them. They happen because someone chose compassion when it would have been easier to walk away.